Hello and welcome back to the A4Q Testing Summit. My apologies for the late start to this session. With me today, I have Geoff Thompson. Just a note to our viewers, I would appreciate it if you have any questions to please leave it in the comments section below, and also tune into our next sessions. We will be implementing a voting structure for the Best Speaker Award this year. So if you find Geoff's presentation interesting, please head over to the program on our website and give us a vote. Geoff, I'm looking forward to your presentation. Please tell us more about how we can make IT accessible to everyone.
Thanks, Abby. Are my slides live? There we are. They're there. Lovely. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world listening and watching this. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you about accessibility. I've been involved in IT for over 30 years, and in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, accessibility has become quite a passion of mine. So what we are talking about today is accessibility. And what do you know about accessibility, I guess, is a big question from me to you. What do you know? So did you know that on May the 18th this year was Global Accessibility Awareness Day? Now that's global. It's the first or second time it's happened. It is massive. Yeah, the world is watching accessibility. If you're not doing accessibility in your organization now, and you're not making sure that your applications are all accessible, your company isn't, then you are against what else is happening everywhere else in the world. So please, please, please watch the rest of this presentation, understand a bit more about why it's important and what you can do to make it work. So what is digital accessibility? Digital accessibility is all about making sure that all of your digital assets are accessible to everyone, be they having a disability or not. Yeah. So it's about your website, your applications, your tools, your technologies, anything that's designed to interact with a person, and that has to be available to people with disability. So actually they can use it without any barriers. So there's no difference whether you have a disability or not. That's the key angle when it comes to digital accessibility. But when you go into more detail, what do I mean by accessibility and therefore digital accessibility? But the way I look at it is there are 4 fundamental accessibility issues that people have. 8% of our population have visual impairments, right? So those people either can't see colors properly on a screen, and I say visual impairments. They may have a blindness, or they may actually just be colorblind. So actually, it's all about making sure that your screen is visually readable by people. So for example, a white screen with yellow text is not necessarily can be visualized by people who are colorblind, for example. That would just look white. So it's about making sure there's a distinction between your colors on your screens, so that the screen readers that pick up on these things can do that. 15% of adults have hearing impairments. So you need to be able to make sure that all our systems can be used by people with a hearing disability, be they transposing spoken word into text, or actually being louder, or actually being slower, so that the user can actually understand. As an older person myself, I'm proud to say I have passed that milestone of 60. 18% of what we call elders, people over the 65, have what we call cognitive issues. So you need to keep the systems need to work in a succession of easily understood and in a meaningful sequence for people, so that they can move very comfortably through it. And finally, there is a high number of individuals who have motor challenges. So maybe their hands don't work properly, whatever else, and they need things that enable them to use the computer. So, for example, a standard set of fast path keys on the keyboard, speech recognizers that can actually pick up words from the screen and help them, so that when they can, I can say, please send an email to, and it will do that for me. So these are the 4 areas that I consider to be the key areas when it comes to impairments that we're trying to make systems accessible for. Now, alongside these that's the human condition. We have some acts, some legal acts, and some standards that exist now, quite widely exist actually, to help people. I'll come back to WCAG in a minute, but I think that the most crucial one of these and the most interesting one of these is the second one. In the US today, it's the only place in the world, as far as I'm aware, who actually have enacted accessibility into law. And we'll talk a bit more about the impact of that in a few slides' time. The rest of these are generally guidance notes. They're not, you don't have to do it, but they are guidance to how you can make something accessible. And the most popular of those is WCAG, which are the Web Contact Accessibility Guidelines. Now they're a way of measuring your accessibility capability that's common around the world. Okay, so looking more detailed at it, what WCAG is trying to do, and it's currently at version 2.1, potentially moving to 3 very soon, I believe, is that everything you do to help people use your systems are perceivable, operable, understandable, and are robust. So they're basically absolutely the right thing, and you can measure your compliance level against 3 grades within WCAG. The most popular is a AA grade. Most people go for a AA grade. At the moment, there's no legal requirement to do any more or to do any of this, but those that do it tend to go for a AA grade, which is effectively picking up their WCAG's recommended requirements for accessibility. For those who maybe don't need to be quite so sophisticated in their accessibility, there are a basic set of requirements defined by WCAG, and that's single A graded. And then you have AAA, which is basically full compliance to the WCAG standards. Now, there are some AAA companies out there who've really seriously understood the requirements of their customers and the need to be totally accessible. But that's that in a nutshell is what digital accessibility is and how we measure ourselves against it. But did you know in the UK, in England and Wales, we have approximately 17.8% of our population have a disability of some sort. That's around 10.4 million people. So if you're testing a system that is used in England and Wales, 17% of your audience probably can't access it unless you develop it in a way that makes it possible for them to access it. When I've said this before, people have said to me, oh, well, that's easy, isn't it? We just make the system work for people. And I said, well, that's it. And we've done that. And it's like, oh, have you? So actually, there was an assessment done only a few years ago. Actually, it's 2 years ago, looking at websites and looking at how compliant they are. And the shocking number from 18 to 24 months ago was nearly 97% of our websites, our home pages in the UK, had detectable accessibility errors. And some of those errors will have absolutely stopped people using the system. So very quickly, the sort of things that we make mistakes with on any screen, in be it web or on your mobile, there'll be images. Now, if you are visually impaired, you can't see an image. So what's supposed to sit behind that is some alt text that is readable and is then read to the person using the system by their screen reader to tell them what's on the image. Now, what I mean by that is that if you assume you've got a picture of a horse, what you don't want is the message image 1 coming up being read out to you. What you want is 3 black horses or 3 white horses. Yeah. And in 97% of the cases, there was no message behind this to help people understand what the image is. We have a challenge with improper heading structure. When people design web screens, they move the heading around between different web screens. And that's really difficult for people with cognitive issues to move around. Yeah, if you keep changing the structure of the screens, it doesn't make it very easy to use. So again, there are lots of people with that challenge. A significant amount of the defects found were around inadequate keyboard accessibility. So there are a standard set of keys to move around screens that need to be programmed into the website so that the customer can use the keys on their keyboard rather than a mouse. They're not there. Insufficient color contrast, you know, a dark brown, light brown, and a green right next to each other will probably not be visible, as that'll be one color to a lot of people. In the same way with images, we have fields full of data, and they also need a text label, and often that text label doesn't describe what's in the data. Interestingly, a lot of websites and mobiles are now playing media while you watch them. But for a person who has an accessibility issue, they need the ability to stop that. They need the ability to slow it down or speed it up or make it louder. And there are basically no controls embedded in a lot of the media that was looked at. And then I think probably the worst mistake people make is that they build a very, very, very accessible website and then load it with PDFs of information, but they don't make the PDFs accessible at all. So then they can't be read by the screen readers. So you click on the system enables you to click on it, brings the screen up, and the screen reader cannot read what's on the screen. So these are the kind of things that were around just 18 months ago, and I'm sure it hasn't changed significantly since then. So these are the kind of things that we need to get right. And as testers, we are the people that should make sure these things are in the systems, yeah? Now, I know somebody will say to me, but if there aren't any requirements, it's not our job to test. Yeah, but we need to think about that, and I'll come back to that later on. Now, I mentioned earlier that the US now has laws against accessibility breaches. And by having laws, litigation is now rife on accessibility lawsuits in the US. So you might say, well, that's fine. That's the US. It's not going to happen to me. But I don't know what for those based in the UK, I know that the UK government will not enforce a law on IT until it is fully compliant first. Well, it's currently about 90–95% compliant from an accessibility point of view across its profile. So I guess it may not be long before the UK government put in a law. And then if we're not compliant, people are going to get sued. I don't know what the situation is in other countries, but I'm sure the same thing will happen. Yeah, it's becoming more and more and more important to actually get your accessibility right. The sad thing here is that not only could you lose 10%, up to 10% of your customers who cannot access, but you could then get fined a considerable amount of money on top. Your companies could be fined a considerable amount of money on top. So actually, let's just look back on this and say, well, why is it important? Why are people getting litigation? Well, check out your own high street. Yeah, I'm going to flick forward a screen and back again. That's what my current high street looks like. It's coffee shops and it's charity shops. Yeah. So the high street is full of shops that aren't digitized and won't and can't digitize. You can't digitize sitting around a coffee table having a cup of coffee with a friend. Well, you can try, but it doesn't taste like real coffee. And because the content of charity shops is changing regularly, they're not in a position to digitize and go online to sell their stuff. Yes, some of them use things like eBay to get rid of things, but generally they don't. So I think, yeah, the world is moving. The world is moving away from the high street. Everybody is digitizing, and it's not just the high street that's changing. Obviously, as we've seen over the years, applications are being built standalone. Certainly in the UK, we've seen some major high street brands disappear off the high street and then reappear as a digital brand. But it's not about all those that were born with accessibility issues. Yeah, as you get older, things change. Yeah, maybe you need glasses. I need glasses for long distance. Yeah, so I'm okay doing this, but I can't see 10 foot ahead of me, for example. Now, other people are short distance impaired, which means they can't read screens, and they get that over time. You know, people have arthritis. Things that grow on people. You cannot guarantee that it's just. We're not just talking about people that are born with problems. But the key thing here is that solving those issues on the systems, the accessibility issues on the systems, will make them more usable, not only to those with the accessibility issues, but also to everybody else. I don't know whether you know this, but way back when we first got mobile phones, all they could do was make phone calls. They were like an extension of your home phone, but outside of your building. Somebody picked up, with the technology that was available at the time, that actually that doesn't help people who are deaf, for example. Now, I know landlines can't help people that are deaf, but they found a way of helping people with a mobile phone. And that was creating the function called texting. So texting, if you go into any restaurant today, I guarantee you 50% of the people sitting at the tables will be texting to somebody. And none of those have got accessibility issues. So something that was born out of an accessibility requirement has now become a staple requirement for all of us. Okay. But I wanted to particularly pick in on a bank now because I want to do a case study. And I don't know what it's like across Europe and the rest of the world, but certainly in the UK, around the COVID time, we saw a lot of banks shut down on the high street. They were already doing it, but in a slow way. But during COVID, that all sped up. So a lot of people, everybody needs to use their bank. We all got mobile apps, all those kind of things. So the banks have started to move off. And I want to use a case study of a particular client of mine who will remain nameless, but let's say UK High Street Bank, who closed about 80% of its branches in 2020. And it moved people to what it called customer journeys online, but didn't really consider the impact of moving everybody onto the internet for its clients. So what happened after about a year and some customer feedback, a person, and I'll refer to him again later on, thought it was a good idea to have a look at what they could do to understand what the issue is around accessibility. So they created a small digital team, accessibility team, that was all side of desk. It was all volunteers, people who thought it was a valuable thing to do. So they pulled colleagues together to help. They had a test vendor at the time, an accessibility test vendor who helped a little bit to get them started. And they started to prove that there were issues. They found defects that were fundamentally stopping people using their systems. So the next step they did, and this is where I'll talk about the person who did it, was to start to create a team. Now, this was actually created out of the performance testing. So this is accessibility testing. So it's accessibility problem, but actually driven by test to fix. And ironically, it was the guy who ran the performance test team in this bank. Now, for those of you who've been testing in a while, you'll remember the times when performance testing was the thing that just got left and nobody cared about it. And it was the last thing we did and nobody ever cared about the results. And the performance test teams fought and are now taken incredibly seriously and coming very early in the project. So this guy is used to fighting to get his voice heard. He understood the issue and it was a customer issue. So it was everybody's issue. So he created a business case which looked at not only the money side of things, but the value to the customer in having accessible systems. They started looking at projects. They started looking around how the product could be better in its accessibility. They spoke to internal and external customers to get their feedback. And then they started to build a team using internal colleagues, where they retrained them, they gave them all new opportunities and was incredibly motivated. The team became incredibly motivated. So the team became established back in 22. Where they are today is they've now moved to what they call the One Bank Digital Accessibility Team. And this is something that runs across, this is one of the large banks, right? So they have all the business leaders engaged. They're all committed to this. They have designed controls and measures. They've set the leadership standard. They've defined the strategy and mission. They have the capability. They have the operation set up. And they have partnerships with suppliers, such as Qualitest, my own company. So what they've also done on top of that is actually start to build out that in itself is great, but you need to let people know so that people will want you to come and help them. So they now have enterprise-wide working groups going all the time. Every month there's some kind of meeting going. Sometimes it's a brown bag session, sometimes it'll be an all-day session to help people understand why they should get it right. So they support them getting those best practices together, and they've developed training courses to show people how and why this is important. In the background, they've built a very strong team of permanent resources whose job it is to do accessibility testing. Where are they at with that? They have all the governance processes in place now, right up to the CEO. If it is found that a P1 accessibility issue goes into production, all hell breaks loose. They've done loads. They've got component libraries now so that people can go there to get copies of designs and branding guidelines to make sure they comply. The business leaders are totally bought into digital accessibility, and the culture has changed around the organisation. And the net result is they're getting great feedback now from their customers. They've assessed over 75 applications. They've run about 212 tests. Doesn't sound very much, but they found 6,400 bugs, which are all slowly being fixed. 150 of those were P1 bugs, were physically stopping people using the system. They're all fixed now. Through the process and the controls, they've now reduced the cost of doing this to 81% of what it was when they started 3 years ago. They have a relationship that means they're flexible with their they've implemented the tools that you use for accessibility into their CI/CD pipelines, and at design level now there is a consideration of accessibility. So testing has made this happen. So I'm very proud of my colleagues at the bank who've done such a great job in encouraging people to think about this and understand the importance. So the sort of customer insights they get is that they want to change and they want to become more accessible. The customers enjoy the fact that they're seeing the bank change. There's more functionality online than they ever used to get at branches now, so it's a lot more usable for them. The online services are great, and the big thing, they've got this great chatbot that the customer can slow down and speed up depending on their capability to hear properly. So very good customer feedback. But I think one of the things that has come through in the slides I've talked about so far is who owns it? I'm talking about people in test who've driven this. So who owns accessibility in any organisation? Well, I'd ask another question: who owns application quality? Because the answer is the same, and the answer is all of us. Everybody does. So everybody involved in a development owns accessibility, owns quality. They all have a part to play to make sure accessibility works, or we give a quality app. So we need to, as we all own it, there is nothing wrong in us, in the testing community, driving this, because we know the impact, because we do all the testing, yeah. But how would you do that? How would you actually get your organisation to come on board and work with you and make sure that this all happens? So there are three key things that you need to think about. You can't just start testing. That's the wrong thing to do. And you can't. There is no point in doing it as the bank you saw with the bank. They started as a side of desk effort. Nobody knew they were doing anything. They did that to collect data. They didn't do it to do testing, right? So the first thing you need to do is to raise some awareness. So get some basic information about your customers, feedback from your customers, all those kind of things, things around basic defects you found by a very quick look on your website, all those kind of things. And work with senior management, work with the people like your senior executives, your stakeholders, your senior managers, to get their commitment, but also talk and work with your developers, because you need these people to be on board with you as well, your developers, your designers, and other people in test, and get their commitment and get some funding from the stakeholders to move forward. And the way you move forward initially is you need to understand where you are today. What is the size of my problem? So the first thing you need to do is this kind of assessment and audit process where you review your current website, your mobile app or any other digital asset, and you understand what the defects are and what criticality they are to the business. Yeah, so P1s would obviously need to be identified quickly. And then you can start to schedule getting some of that stuff fixed. However, if you don't stop accessibility issues being added in, you're never going to clear the backlog, because you'll always have new ones that are coming in. So you need to start establishing proper policies to help your organization to develop software in an accessible way, an accessible and acceptable way. Now, different companies will have a different priority when it comes to accessibility. Some people who don't have real long-term customer interaction may have a lower need necessarily than a company that has long-term customer interaction, as an example. But you need to also set up standards, and you can use the WCAG standards as an example. You don't need to create them yourself. And with these three things together, you start to build the desire and the need and the ongoing governance that means that, because as part of your accessibility policies, you'll be measuring how effective each application is at meeting the accessibility requirements. And that measurement will be reported. Yeah. So people will, if you, as we all know, the more measurement of an of a project you do, the more chances are it's going to be successful. The less you control and manage it, the less chance there is it's going to have all the right accessibility components in. So it's not an easy job, but you know, I would encourage anybody who is currently working in an environment doing testing where nobody does anything about accessibility to have a think about this. But when I talked earlier about, you know, when you're doing the initial piece of work, you need to communicate with people. So actually, here's a view of what those people might be. So the kind of people that will own the accessibility compliance strategy, so how we're going to approach compliance, will be people like the Chief Information Officer or the Technology Officer or the Chief Compliance Officer. The actual accessibility requirements are owned by the product managers, people in the business who will have a better view of the customer and their requirements. Now, one of the things that has grown over the last few years, quite a lot faster actually than accessibility testing, is usability testing. They're very closely related, but they are quite different. So actually what I'm finding and seeing is a lot of companies are using their heads of user accessibility, user testing, to actually drive the whole process across IT, make sure it's in development, design, as well as test. And then obviously there's us, there's the QA owners, and we're the ones that make sure that if there are standards, we check against them to make sure they're compliant every time. So accessibility is everyone's responsibility. Nobody on this call or this webinar can say they're not responsible. But you must never feel guilty about not knowing. Yeah, up until today, you may not have known that, but you do now. So it's what happens from here that really counts. Yeah. So go get curious. Go have a look at what there is out there to guide you with what you need to do. You don't have to do it on your own. Talk to your colleagues. Get a group together. Meet over a coffee and see if there is enough desire to move things forward. But this will never move forward unless somebody says something and does something. Now, to help you on this slide deck, I've included a few references where you can go to find out a bit more about accessibility, to get hold of the WCAG guidelines. They're freely available on there. If you go to the Royal National Institute of the Blind site, they provide access to people with sight loss with technology to help them use systems for free. So yeah, they're very helpful. I've spoken to the Royal National Institute of the Blind before, and they're very, very helpful. They won't necessarily give you a tool unless you have a problem, but they will be. So have a look, see what you see. You have my contact details. Please reach out to me if you want any other help or advice. That's all I have to say for today. So thank you for listening. Are there any questions?
Geoff, firstly, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation about accessibility. I think that it's important to keep in mind, especially considering that there are many people who struggle with accessibility, and everybody uses websites and applications. We do have a few questions for you, however. How easy is it to gain commitment to accessibility and accessibility testing?
Oh, that's a good question. It's about the right message. So if you just go running and say, I must do this, you've got to let me do this, you'll get nothing. Yeah. So you need to prepare. And if you can prepare, there is a lot of information on the internet about the impact. You know, if you work in a retail organization and you tell your boss he's potentially losing 20% of his business, I bet he'll listen. Yeah. If you just tell him I want to do accessibility testing, he'll say, why? Yeah. So I think it depends. But if you give the right information, you've got the right business case, then absolutely everybody I have spoken to who has done that is now doing accessibility testing in their organisation.
Wonderful. Isn't accessibility testing expensive?
Right. So expensive is an interesting word. So is it expensive? So it is a more cost potentially. Yeah. So particularly when you start and you've got a backlog of problems that you need to fix, that costs. The goal to go forward is to get your standards in place and your policies in place so that when you run your tests, they pass first time. So they add very little extra cost to your actual life cycle. As I showed with the bank, once they've got established, now 2 years in, they've reduced the cost of doing this by over 81%. So yeah, it's about efficiency. But yes, initially it can be expensive, but it's about the commitment to your customers.
We have one last question for you. Can I just use automated tools to test for accessibility?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think I was going to mention it earlier, and I think I forgot. I talked about WCAG, and there are a lot of tools that exist out there to do the WCAG type testing. However, with anything like this, which is all about usability, you do need some practical hands-on work. So yes, you can just use tools, but that would probably only get you to the basic level of WCAG compliance. If you want to become properly compliant, and I'm talking AA, you would use potentially some people with accessibility issues, maybe some partially sighted people, maybe people with motor problems where their hands don't work very well, all that kind of stuff, to go in and actually try the system as well. Then I think you get a better solution. But if you just do it with tools, you're going to get the minimum level of compliance, which may be acceptable to your organisation.
Definitely. We have one more question for you. How does making software accessible influence other software characteristics like performance or security?
Well, that's interesting. So I don't see a direct connection between accessibility and performance and security. I see that potentially to become compliant will not deteriorate the performance of your applications. Yeah, the things that are needed, they're there already. They're just not used properly. So, for example, when I said the alt text that sits behind pictures, that's already there. It just needs to have the right words in it, for example. So there's no extra impact on performance because of that. Now, security, I don't see the connection necessarily, but I'd happily offline if that person who asked the question wants to send me an email. It's an interesting question. On the face of it, I'm not sure I see the connection between the two and how it influences that, because the only thing that would be different for a person using the security on an accessible system is that when the questions appear on the screen, for example, they might have to be read out. So they'd have to use a headphone or something like that rather than sit in the middle of a cafe and their password be read out to them. So yeah, they'd have to be using headphones, but it wouldn't necessarily impact that security. But you'd have to make sure, like with anything with personal security, you don't disclose your data and you find ways of hiding it when you're doing stuff. So I'm not sure I see the connection, but happy to talk to somebody if they want to reach out to me.
So I think that this audience member is referring to submissions and capture.
Okay, submissions and capture. No, I don't think it makes any difference to that at all. If, for example, I'm submitting something, so I'm talking to my screen rather than typing on it, that's no difference at all. The screen reader has all the security stuff built into it. It will then convert it onto the screen. Yeah, I don't see it necessarily. But again, I'm happy to have a conversation with someone because I'd love to understand if there is something there.
Wonderful. Geoff, thank you so much for your very, very insightful presentation about accessibility. I think it is something that many software testers and developers, as well as organizations and companies, need to keep in mind when developing their websites and possibly integrating and including the less advantaged people. I'd like to just mention to our audience today that we will be live again on the hour for our next session. And again, if you enjoyed Geoff's topic today and enjoyed his presentation, please go ahead and vote for him on the program on our website. Give him a good 5 stars because this presentation definitely deserved it. Geoff, thank you so much, and we hope to see you at our next conference.
Thanks, Abby, and thank you, everyone.